The Plateau region can be divided into three groups. These groups are Athabascan, Interior Salish, and Tanaha, which can be further divided into 8 groups. Chilcotin, people of Chilcotin River. The Carrier, which are custom people followed of widows carrying ashes of their deceased husbands in bags for a year. Nicola, people along Nicola Valley. Chikwepem, also known as Sheshwap. Statlium, formerly known as Lillooet, meaning wild onion. The well-known Okanagan. The Inkalakatma, formerly known as Thompson, referring to the Thompson River. And Tanaha, formerly known as Kootenay. People of the Plateau region obtained food through hunting, fishing, and gathering. Men were in charge of hunting a variety of animals, especially white-tailed deer and caribou. Tools and weapons such as bows, arrows, knives, and traps were used for hunting. Men were also responsible for fishing for their main food source, which was the Pacific salmon from rivers such as the Fraser River and Columbia River. The salmon were caught with salmon weirs, scooped with baskets, or caught with spears. Women were in charge of gathering berries, roots, and bulbs for the food and for medicine using baskets made of birch. Women also prepared all of the food. The salmon would either be roasted, baked, or hung in smokehouses. Lots of the food, such as salmon and berries, had to be dried and preserved for winter months.
The languages of the Plateau people can be divided into 3 main groups: Athabascan, Salesian, and Tanahan. The Athabascan languages of the Plateau region are part of the Northern Athabascan language groups and are related to the Athabascan languages in the subarctic language groups. The Athabascan languages are Chilcotin, Carrier, and Nicola Similacim. The Interior Salesian languages can be divided into the Northern Interior Salesian language groups, Sheshwap and Lillooet. The Southern Interior Salesian groups are Okanagan and Inkalakatman. The Tanahan language is unrelated to any other languages in British Columbia. It is spoken by Kootenay people only.
The most important religious leaders were the Shaman. It is believed that they had special powers to heal the sick, control the hunt, and predict the future by communicating with the spirit world. They had many myths and legends that were passed on to generations. The most famous myth involves the creator known as Coyote. It is believed that the coyote was in charge of bringing salmon up the river every spring and fall, and for transforming people into their present-day form. During adolescence, the Plateau people would go on spiritual vigils alone, where they fasted and prayed in hopes that the guardian spirit would appear to them in a vision.
The women of the Plateau region were responsible for making all the clothing for their families. Their clothes were made of tanned hides, grasses, and softened bark. The most common animal hides used for clothing were muskrat, beaver, and deerskin. The men wore leggings that were either made from animal hide or grasses. They wore shirts that were usually made out of animal skins, and in some groups, like the Kutuna Aksa, decorated their shirts with long fringes. Plateau men also wore breechcloths and moccasins. The women wore skirts or dresses. Dresses were often decorated with beadwork and long fringes. It was common to paint clothing with designs that symbolized an object, place, or event. For example, the images on this young girl's dress were painted to tell a story. The red ochre lines drawn along the seams were good luck. A red cross represented the sun. A blue circle represented the clouds. The red dots represented the stars. The women also wore moccasins. People used beads to decorate a lot of their clothing. Most of the beads were made out of soapstone. They also decorated their clothing with paint. Usually, they used geometric patterns to represent different things, such as blue squares represent a lake, Red lines represented the earth. Since winters were very cold in the plateau region, they needed to make clothes that would keep them warm. They used thicker animal skins and animal furs to add extra warmth to their clothing. Thicker leather pants were worn during the winter. An animal skin or fur hat was used as protection against the cold. Dresses were used to represent a person's status within the community. The more elaborate headdresses for ceremonies were made with feathers and beads.
The people of the plateau believed that there were spirits in all living and non-living things. Some of these spirits were bad, and others were good. They had strong spiritual relationships with nature and have great respect for animals. Some of the most important ones were deers, coyotes, and horses.
The plateau people held ceremonies throughout the year to mark special occasions. One important time of the year for the plateau people was the arrival of spring. They held celebrations at the start of spring to mark the first salmon run or the appearance of the first berries. The ceremonies involved a lot of music and dancing, which were both used to summon up religious powers. It is mainly singing, but they used other instruments too, like bird bone flutes, rattles, sticks striking boards, and hide-covered wooden drums. The Winter Guardian Spirit Dance was hosted by a shaman. It involved several days of dancing and healing the sick. Essentially, it was a way to show the people how they communicated with the spirit world. The sun dance involved singing and dancing, fasting, and spiritual visions. People believe that unless the sun dance is performed each year, the earth will lose touch with the creative power of the universe, thereby losing its ability to regenerate.
The type of house that they lived in varied by season. There are three main types: the pit house, the teepee, and the tool mat lodge. Pit houses were used mainly during the winter seasons, but they could be used all year round. The entrance of the house was below ground and it had a ladder at the top. To build a pit house, they would use wooden stakes or elk scapule shovels to dig a pit in the ground. The frame of the house was made of wooden poles and covered with layers of timber, bark, and earth. Most pit houses were 8 to 10 meters wide and many families would live in it, but a chief's house would be twice the size. They have a smoke hole located in the center of the roof or a door at the side of the roof which gives the house its name. Teepees were houses made with wooden frames and covered with tules, which are large cattail-like plants that grow in marshes. Tool mat lodges are similar to teepees, but they are larger in size. Teepees and tool mat lodges would be used in the summer and were constructed above ground, unlike the pit house. The plateau people were semi-nomadic, so they would build temporary shelters called lean-tos. They are made from poles and tool brush mats and were built to lean against a solid frame, which made them very temporary.
The plateau region formed 10,000 years ago as glaciers moved northwards. The plateau region was a very small area with a very diverse geography. They were between the coastal region of British Columbia and the Rocky Mountains. They had many boreal forests and had many natural waterways such as the Thompson, Mackenzie, and Fraser rivers. Lower elevations included grasslands and subarctic forests. Since salmon were the plateau's main food source, they had to follow the fish, which meant they were semi-nomadic. Since they were surrounded by many waterways, they often traveled with wooden dugout canoes called sturgeon-nosed canoes made of red cedar, cottonwood trees, or bark. In the winter time, they would use snowshoes, and when hunting, they would use a pack of dogs. When they were introduced to horses in the 1730s, they often used the horses for carrying people.
The Plateau people lived and traveled together in family groups. The division of labor within a family was split along gender lines. The men had certain responsibilities, as did the women. The men were the decision makers in the family. They were also responsible for hunting, trapping, fishing, making tools, and warfare. The women were responsible for preparing the food, harvesting plants, caring for children and home, and making clothes. Plateau society was communal and generally free of classes. Within each community, sharing of food and other resources was expected. They generally lived in small seasonal bands or independent villages. Each village had one or several leaders or chiefs. There were usually one main village or family chief who had inherited the role from their father. Then there were other chosen chiefs. They were picked for different roles such as hunting or warfare because of their personal abilities and knowledge. Plateau society was relatively democratic, with all the men in the village getting a say in all major decisions.
Art was used both spiritually and in everyday use. Rock paintings were common in the southern interior of British Columbia. Paint was made from red orchard pigments mixed with animal oil or fish eggs. The paintings were of humans, animals, or spiritual figures. Women would weave baskets, blankets, mats, and clothing using goat's wool and bark. Blankets made in the interior Salish were brightly colored and were made from goat's wool, usually woven in a zigzag pattern with different colored rags and twine. Baskets were used for carrying goods, storage, and cooking. They were made out of birch bark, spruce, or cedar trees. Most baskets were woven with a geometric pattern or had pictures of animals. A common type of basket was the club basket. Each row was woven into the previous one, making it look like a continuous spiral. Carvings were another form of art. They were made out of stone, bone, or antlers, and they were mostly carvings of animals like bears or birds. They used beads to decorate a lot of their clothes. The beads were mainly made out of soft rocks, consisting largely of talc. They also painted geometric patterns onto their clothes to represent different things. Blue squares represented the lake, and red lines represented the earth.